Okay.
We have live.
Live. Excellent. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the House Progressive Caucus. It is Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. And we're excited today to have several visitors. And so first, we'll start our caucus by going around and doing introductions. In about 10 to 15 minutes, we'll move on to our guest panel, which is around labor issues and working people's rights, a few pieces of legislation. But we always like to start first with introductions with everyone who's in the room. So I'll begin. I'm State Representative Emma Mulvaney-Stanek. I represent a portion of Burlington, and I am the House Caucus Leader for the Progressives. I always go to my left.
John Shronsky, I'm the Executive Director for the Vermont Progressive Party.
Good afternoon, Taylor Small, Assistant Caucus Leader and Representative from Winooski. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Troy Hedrick, representative from a portion of Burlington. He and him pronoun.
Molly Burke, representing Brattleboro.
Patty McCoy, representing Rutland 1, which is Poultney, Ira, and a little piece of Wells, Lake St. Catherine, and serve as the House Republican Caucus Leader.
Liz Medina, I'm with the Vermont State Labor Council, which is our state's federation of labor unions. I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Kristen Warner. I'm the Public Policy Manager for Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. And I'm here also as a 20-year veteran to labor movement. So I'm also coming from that perspective and point of view too.
Great. We have one online. Susan, just want to introduce yourself briefly. We'll come back to all of our guests a little more formally.
Good afternoon. Susan Garcia-Nofi, she, her staff attorney at Vermont Legal Aid.
Great. Thanks, Susan. All right. Well, first up on our agenda, we actually have guests from the House Sexual Harassment Prevention Panel with us today, just to give our caucus a little bit of an update and to share what you'd like to share with caucus members. And, you know, we'll have, if anyone has questions, we'll just hold them until the chair of the panel shares them.
Thank you for having us, Representative Molly Burke, as I just announced. And I am the chair of the panel. And we had a presentation several weeks ago of the training, sexual harassment prevention training. And we, as a panel, decided afterwards that we should go to the caucuses and introduce ourselves, because that didn't really happen, so that people knew if they wanted to come and talk to us about something, they could put a face to a name. On the policy and rules of procedure are on the legislative webpage. If you go to the committees page, the Sexual Harassment Prevention Panel is listed as one of the committees. If you click on that, there are two documents. One is the rules of procedure, if you want to make a complaint or how you proceed with a complaint. The other is the actual policy. So I just want to direct people to that. And I just want to emphasize that we are a resource for people. Somebody has a question, you can come to us and just say, hey, I had a funny feeling or a question about this, or what do you think about this? And it doesn't have to go anywhere else other than that, except that as a panel member, we just inform other panel members of that, just to, in case there turns out that there's patterns of behavior that we're noticing. But so that's one way. And I think it's important to stress that, because I think a lot of times people just like, well, you know, I sort of thought about this, but it was sort of insignificant. And I think I just don't want to make a big deal out of it. But you can do that in total confidence and confidential. And now I'll leave it to Representative Hedrick to continue.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sitting in the chair twice. One as a member of this panel as well. There are 5 of us actually on the panel. Not here are Representative Mike Moricki and Representative Carol Brannigan. So we are a tripartisan group. Hopefully one of us might feel approachable if you do have the questions that Molly was referring to, or if you want to engage us in talking about a potential policy violation. As Molly stated, we remain confidential, and I think that's a critical point to make. You can come to us and talk about, even as Molly said, just a quick question or possibly engaging the process. We are obligated, if we learn of behavior that may violate the policy, we are obligated to take steps to make sure that behavior stops. And we're also obligated to let the panel know that we've been notified. From there, the complainant really does stay in the driver's seat, and you have a lot of options. You can take no action. You can take really informal action, informal mediated conversations, or a formal process. And we can help explain those to you if there's something that is on your mind that you think may violate or approach a violation of the policy.
And bringing up the rear here. We are trying, our goal is to continue to work on a more respectful environment in the House, of which we are in charge of our House section, but none of us, including any rep that's sitting here, is a mandated reporter, except when it comes to anyone under the age of 18. And as you're aware, our pages are in the 8th grade, that 12, 13-year-old area. So if you see something that is absolutely a mandated policy issue that you have to mandate report to one of the panel members here, with us three or Carolyn or Mike Maricki. And I think we've done a good job over the last several years of bringing it into a more respectful environment. I've been here 9 years. I don't know, Molly, you've been here
16.
Yeah. So I have seen a difference in our respect level, which is great. And so we hope to improve on that. But as Representative Hedrick said, there are different avenues that you can go down if you choose to. But first, even if you're even a little bit of questioning something, feel free to stop and speak to any one of the 5 panel members.
And I just want to add that, and we sort of forgot this in the other presentations, you can also go to Human Resources, you can go to Speaker, you could go to Leadership, your own leadership, whatever. And that, if something, say, went to somebody, that would probably come to us eventually. But, different people feel more comfortable with, the person that somebody feels most comfortable with is really the avenue. So just wanted to stress that. And thank you very much for listening.
Yes.
Are there any questions before our panel guests depart? Minus Representative Hedrick, who's required to stay. Any questions at all? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Another meeting.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. All right, so moving right along, just a very brief House leadership updates, and then we're going to talk about one amendment. Thank you very much. I'm glad I'm like still being recorded. That was good. So quickly from House leadership, same weekly schedule for the floor this week. That might change in the near future as more things start to move out of committee, but same floor schedule for the week. Another friendly reminder, though I'm very proud of our caucus for honoring decorum on the floor, but we were asked to pass that along to make sure that folks are mindful of the rules and decorum, which include things such as very short announcements, no personalities, if you will, in any speeches on the floor, et cetera. And if you have any questions about that at all, you can let Representative Small or myself know. But again, I want to emphasize, I think our caucus has been doing fine on this regard. So that's more of your other colleagues if you feel up for helping us keep the floor productive. And then finally, we have 2 positions, as folks might know, within the legislative staff world that have been going through a hiring process, which is our director of the Legislative Council. And so they're very close to offering this position to someone, and there should be a public announcement in the next maybe week to 10 days, which is really helpful. We know that that office in particular has been very overworked. My observations. And so I think adding this adding a new person into this position will further help that office be fully staffed and in capacity that it needs. And then finally, the chief of the Capitol Police is another position. We've had an interim chief for the last several months or so. That is also close to ending, the hiring process ending there. So more information will be coming out soon on that. And if you have any questions, you can let me know about that. That is House leadership, right, Representative Small? I don't think we had anything else and you can see very much more minor things in email if you, I think there's a couple of super minor things in email. So with that, let's just go quickly around among members of the caucus of any particular bills or amendments, things we want to raise before we go to our guests. I'm aware of just one, I believe, which Representative Small is one of the sponsors of an amendment to H363, which we heard on the floor today for second reading. So Representative Small, would you like to explain a little bit about the amendment?
Oh, happily. A few things I will update about. First is the amendment, which you heard will come up on the floor tomorrow. This was a tripartisan conversation recognizing the intention of the bill and recognizing racism and how it shows up in the workplace and in various accommodations.
I want to say a brief thing about the underlying bill, just for those watching at home.
Yes, underlying bill is focused on hairstyles and protective hairstyles on the basis of race in regards to public accommodations, employment, and housing. And our amendment is recognizing the breadth of hairstyles and in particular head wraps that folks might be using that are outside the bounds of race, but are still very much important and should be protected. So including religion, folks in transition and gender expression, as well as age. There's another one that came up, but that one, I won't get into it. So we are presenting that to the committee this afternoon. Hope for at least a robust discussion and maybe some support on this one. And we'll report back on how that goes. The other one I'll update you on is we finally passed S18 out of House Human Services, and that will be, or you heard before today, it's being referred to House Ways and Means because of a fiscal impact. They are busy at work and addressing Act 127 and its tax implications, so they will not be taking up the bill until next week. My apologies to your email boxes in the time that takes.
What's S18?
S18 is the flavored tobacco ban. When it came over from the Senate, it was all flavored tobacco products, e-liquids, and substitutes. And now it has a three-prong approach, one that bans all tobacco substitute, flavored tobacco substitutes and e-liquids, has a delay on the menthol ban pending review from the Health Equity Advisory Commission, which was established in 2020. And then lastly, provides a carve out for flavored tobacco products, which includes cigars, little cigars, snuff, smokeless tobacco, and shisha. The end.
Thank you, Representative Small. Are there any questions on either the amendment to H363 or S18 for that matter? All right. And is Representative Chena online by chance, Courtney? Can you just let me know if Representative Chena's on? If they can hear us in there.
No.
No, okay, cool, all right. If he pops up, just let me know that. Okay, great. All right, any other bills or amendments from? Yes, okay, Representative Logan.
Thanks. House Environment and Energy is expecting a vote of H289, an act relating to the renewable energy standard in our committee today. I haven't decided what my vote will be on this bill yet because one of the aspects of H289 is a decision to eliminate offsite group net metering as a program. A lot of people think of this as community solar. There are other ways of doing community solar, but this particular way of doing community solar, offsite group net metering, allows the group that hosts the solar array, the net metered solar array, to benefit from a net metering rate for the first 10 years of the project. And the utilities have asked to eliminate this program altogether. I understand the rationale for that. There have been efforts it has been underutilized. It's been an underutilized program. And then there are issues with kind of corruption of this model, developers, getting an individual to host a group net metered project where the developer actually gets the benefit of the net metering rates, the preferred net metering rates. But we've heard testimony from affordable housing developers that offsite group net metering is a really important tool for them to balance the cost of electrification in affordable housing developments, increased cost of, installation of cold weather heat pumps, for example, instead of a natural gas boiler. And then the increased operations cost, increased electricity usage, plus higher maintenance costs for cold weather heat pumps over the life of the equipment versus a natural gas boiler. So it's really kind of just like making the math work on affordable housing developments while we're electrifying, and the other subsidies all added up still don't balance the cost, increased cost, operations cost. So group net metering, offsite group net metering is one of the ways that they've been using that program to help offset affordable housing. In the conversation, it's being presented as like a false dilemma. Well, ratepayers are paying these group net metering rates. This means low income people are paying for these group net metering rates, which of course is a false dilemma. We could also adopt other programs that benefit all low income ratepayers at the same time that we're offering preferred rates for solar installations for affordable housing developers, but nobody's talking about that. So I'm just a little torn. There's negotiation going on right now between affordable housers and utilities about how to resolve this tension in H289. And I'm just waiting to hear back on it, what the resolution is. So that's coming up today. And then H687, an act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection through land use, which is essentially the housing version or the House version of the Act 250 reform. I'll be talking with folks about adding an inclusive zoning component to H687. So those conversations are starting, and that includes Representative Seth Baumgart's in that conversation. So that's kind of like approved direction to take, include this in that bill. And then finally, I hear that H756, the bill to regulate short-term rentals, will be considered this year. So more news on that later, I hope.
Thank you, Representative Logan. Any other bills or updates before we go to our guests for today that are moving out of?
No, I just want to apologize in advance to the guests that I have another meeting at the same time right now, but I came here to say hello and hang out a minute, and I'm going to jump on Zoom and listen to you right until I walk in the other meeting.
Great.
But I wanted you to know that, so I'll just like leave.
Okay.
Hey, yeah, not interrupt you. Because
Like some drama in our clubs.
I'll be like
ourselves.
and just march out.
Yeah.
It won't be about you, but okay.
All right. With seeing no other business, we're going to go right on to our guest panel. So today, being the House Progressive Caucus, as folks often know or should know, we really try to build our caucus priorities for the entire biennium around our core values related to economic justice, social justice, and environmental justice. And keeping along that theme, we closely watch and often lead on legislation related to working families, working people, low-income folks, unions, et cetera, and pretty much are unwavering in our support of folks. So we wanted to make sure early enough in the session to highlight a few different labor bills. It's broader than just unions, the combo of bills that we are going to hear about today. So we have a little bit of a diverse panel, but all, again, on that theme of economic justice. And so this is the order I have, but I'm happy to reorder it if people have any schedule needs. But we're going to hear today from Liz Medina, who is the Executive Director of the AFL-CIO. And I've asked her to specifically address S102, which is the PRO Act, and she can tell us more about that. At any point, if you all want to add like a small piece to it of another bill that we think we should be aware of, feel free. But we're going to have about a little less than 40 minutes together. So see how we do this, by the way, although I think all of you have been here before, maybe not Susan. We usually ask guests to spend like maybe 3 minutes or so sort of outlining the bill, the issue, and then it leaves us enough time for a robust conversation. And I think I'll have each one of you go, and then we'll have a more general conversation to all these matters, if that works. So first we'll have Liz go, but then she'll be followed by Kristen Warner, who is the policy director, correct me if I'm getting any titles wrong, from VBSR, Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, who will speak a bit to H663, which is I'm calling it the Climate Worker Prevailing Wage Bill, which is in House General at the moment. Then we'll hear from David Mickenberg, who's pitch hitting for VSEA on H297, which is a workers' compensation bill related to PTSD suffered by certain state employees, a bill that's also in House General at the moment. And then finally, we'll hear from our colleague Susan Garcia Nofi from Vermont Legal Aid, who is here and not new, but like the new point person on unemployment legislation and from Legal Aid, and we're speaking to a few different bills related to helping to protect Vermonters using the unemployment system as claimants, which is in my committee in Commerce. Exciting lineup, y'all. Like, just hold yourselves back here. I can see you all vibrating with excitement. Okay, so first, let's go with Liz. Liz, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to come back this year and share about the PRO Act with you all again. So what is S1 under 2? Why are we calling it the Vermont version of the PRO Act? The PRO part stands for Protect the Right to Organize. So we are, as a state, looking at ways to make it easier for workers in both the private and public sectors to form unions. And there's 3 ways that our state can do that. Originally, the bill had 4 provisions, but right now it has 3, which I still think will be very transformative for workers here in this state. So one is simply expanding collective bargaining rights to those who have been historically excluded from the National Labor Relations Act, and those groups of workers being agricultural and domestic workers. And it's about time to undo that racist history there. And because the workers are excluded from the NLRA, we as a state can give them that right to form a union and the protections that come with being able to form a union. The second thing it would do is take the captive out of captive audience meetings. So it's not banning them per se, but it's banning the captive part. And for those of you who have not heard of captive audience meetings before, they are unfortunately a very common tactic in union busting campaigns. So when an employer finds out that their employees are trying to form a union and wants to suppress their right to do so and fight that effort, they will hold these meetings. They can be group meetings or one-on-one meetings where they will spread a lot of misinformation and also really intimidate workers and sometimes even commit illegal acts and unfair labor practices. And because our labor law is so weak, generally speaking, it's very hard to hold employers accountable for their behavior during these meetings. So simply, this bill will give workers the option to not participate in these meetings if they so choose. It's generally, I think, appropriate for employees to not be expected to be forced to be subjected to their employer's political or religious beliefs at work. I think those things should be separate. And it also, is a really nasty practice that has gotten out of control. So the third thing would be to simplify union elections in the public sector. Wish I could do this in the private sector. Unfortunately, we are preempted there, but we can simplify union elections in the public sector by enacting card check or majority sign-up elections. 9 other states do this already. It's basically a way to get a campaign moving along and keep its momentum without giving the employer too many opportunities to bust the union or do the captive audience meetings or whatever else they want to do to prevent that. And we know that our labor board has a lot to do, and it could also alleviate some of the extra work that they would have to do by not making this a 2-step process and instead just having a 1-step process. So the 2-step process being normally you'd have to sign union cards. You can only have 30%, but most organizing campaigns will aim for a majority at least. And then you get to have your union election. This is saying if you can get a majority of eligible workers to sign cards, you can move right to contract negotiations. You can recognize a union on the basis of majority of those who signed up. And, there is, a proud level of union density, of course, among our state employees, but there's a lot of municipal workers who are, desiring to have the protections and benefits of a union. And it's very hard for them because they are scattered throughout the state. And you can see kind of some of the disparity between state and municipal workers by their retirement systems and the benefits they offer. And I think that's a reflection of the lower union density among municipal workers and the leverage that they have. So I see this as an equity issue in that sense as well. Of course, this will also simplify things for state employees as well, if those who still would like to join the union and haven't been able to do so. And I see all these pieces not only connected to the moral argument that we should, not suppress workers' rights and make it easier for workers to exercise those rights. But I think in general play a critical role in workforce development. Union members are more likely to stay at their jobs, are more likely to be productive because they have some protections at work. There's less of incentive for the employer to create a toxic work culture and all that. And a lot of our frontline workers are those municipal workers. And I think if we are going to be, build some kind of climate resiliency, we need to make sure those workers are taken care of. And who better to take care of those workers and the workers being able to stand up and take care of themselves and advocate for themselves. So I think, I hope that this bill will make it past the finish line this time. Definitely would love to see a supermajority of representatives supporting this bill. So we can make sure, just in case there's a veto override potential, that I'm happy to talk to anyone about how to talk to your colleagues about this bill and have those important one-on-one conversations. I'll leave it at that and answer any questions you may have.
Great. And I'll ask this question of everybody, so maybe you can put it in the last couple of moments of your presentations, but where the bill is where right now, and has it had hearings, and where is it in terms of the House process?
Sure. It's in House General, and it has had a walkthrough in its first hearing last week.
Great. Thanks, Liz. All right. So again, holding questions so you can hear from our guests first. We're going to next hear from Kristen from VBSR.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on H663. So I view this bill as really the intersection between labor and climate. I come from Montpelier. I was born and raised here and have seen all of the storms. And I know many of you and your colleagues were here with us in Montpelier doing the cleanup. And the first thing that was noticeable was the ServPro Village that popped up. And in every single state-owned parking lot, the green vans literally set up and it looked like a music festival tour with green. And so the state of Vermont hired largely ServPro and this company called Puro Clean to do the initial phases of the flood cleanup. And so these workers were largely brought in. ServPro is a national franchise. They do have 5 locations. We're unclear essentially whether those 5 local locations were able to meet the capacity for the cleanup, although we do have enough evidence through reporting through VT Digger that a lot of the ServPro workers came from out of state and identified as being migrant workers. And so these are jobs that were about pulling hazardous and toxic materials out of state buildings, drying it, and then reassembling and reconstructing these buildings. And so the concern here is really about this is a new base of climate workers that are going to continue to be called upon. And the concern is, how are we as a state investing our dollars in and creating good quality jobs? And so what this bill aims to do is take the existing prevailing wage law and extend it to these workers that are tasked with doing this storm cleanup. We know from the prevailing wage law that exists is that it really tackles the industry and making sure that we're not falsely depressing wages. And it brings the standard up so that everybody has a guaranteed wage, which for labor, we understand in our core, without having some collective bargaining agreement or falling under a law like prevailing wage, you're totally at the mercy of your employer. And so what this law does would seek to establish a bare minimum so that we can ensure that workers that are in Vermont or coming to Vermont to clean up our storms are being treated with the same respect and dignity in their pay as are other construction workers that are here that fall under the prevailing wage. So we think it's a really important step. I think lots of you and your colleagues are figuring out in response to the increase in extreme weather, what we can do to create some standards and protections. And we would say that H663 does both of those things. And we hope that it'll get some support. It is sitting in House General right now. and has been walked through, but it has yet, I think, to be scheduled for any testimony.
Thank you. Kristen, we'll
Yes.
save questions for that
Sure.
as well. I'm partial to that one as the
Yes.
also lead sponsor for the next one actually too. But anyway, David, do you want to speak to H297, the workers' compensation bill for state employees?
Sure.
Please, thanks.
David Mickenberg here on behalf of Working Vermont. H297 was introduced last year, I think.
Yep.
And is a bill which it comes out of the trauma that many state employees are experiencing, various aspects of their work, and is modeled on legislation that we passed a couple of years ago, which gives a presumption of coverage of workers' comp for PTSD to police and fire folks. We passed that a couple of years ago, and it extends that presumption to state employees in a defined universe. I think it's a very positive step forward for a lot of folks and frankly, the state's picking up the cost anyway through their health services. But what it would allow folks to do is get some type of, paid time when they're having to resolve these issues and some compensation for whatever permanent benefits they may have. There was some very powerful testimony last week on the bill in the bills in House General. There was a walkthrough and then some testimony from folks at like the state's attorney's office in Bennington, folks that have had to witness, violence and murders and horrible things. And then there'll be some more compelling testimony today. I mean, the state came in and said, basically, there's no problem. These cases are being adjudicated appropriately. The membership at BSEA would disagree. And so I feel like this bill it's scheduled for markup. I feel like it has some good momentum, and I think a real chance of passing. Can I just mention one other thing?
Go for it. Yeah. Yep.
What Liz was talking about. I would encourage folks if they have some time to go back and watch the testimony from the Lake Champlain Chamber of Commerce about S102. It was I thought very cynical and disheartening to see our sort of number one chamber of commerce, biggest chamber of commerce in the state, say that a ban on captive audience meetings would essentially mean that you can't do DEI trainings in your workplace. And I think it demonstrated a complete misunderstanding of actually the words on the page, but also it really weaponized in a way and sort of, I thought was very cynical and sort of scare tactics to say, DEI will be lost. You can't make employees come to DEI training anymore. Well, the reality is that DEI wouldn't apply in this case. Even if it did apply, which I don't think it does, all it means is that you can't be fired for not going to the meeting. But the equating of DEI with somebody being told that they have to vote for Trump or Biden, or they have to become a Catholic or a Jew or whatever, I just think it's like out of bounds. And I think that testimony is demonstrative of the power dynamic that employers often have, where they feel like they should have the right to do anything they want with their employee as long as it's not discriminatory. And that power dynamic is something which I appreciate this caucus support for pushing back on consistently. So, yeah. But
All right. Well, to be continued, David, thank you for raising that last piece, because I think it is, as but all the members of this caucus are members from Chittenden County in particular, and it's important to flag those very warped and dangerous, I think, I'll use that word, dangerous distortions of what bills fundamentally are, because it really fails to recognize the power dynamics, especially for low-wage workers who don't have access to unions for any further protection of what folks are actually experiencing in workplaces. So thank you for flagging that. All right, let's round out our panel with Susan from Vermont Legal Aid. And I really love and wanted to make sure that this issue of unemployment was part of the mix, because unemployment is often, I find, survey on House Commerce, a workers' rights issue, which doesn't get enough attention because it's involving folks who, once they no longer have their jobs, however, they're still important parts of our communities and getting back into the workforce, and their rights are just as important to track and improve. And so there are a few bills, well, there's lots of bills actually related to unemployment up on the wall in House Commerce, but I've asked Susan to speak to two bills related to overpayment. And there's a report that came back. Members of this caucus will remember a bill that we passed last session that was to look at expanding eligibility related to urgent and compelling reasons for loss of a job, which includes anything from loss of childcare unexpectedly, and then when you're ready to return to the workforce, what that's needed. And I'm happy to round this out a little bit too, Susan, because I don't know if you saw the hearing that we had just last week, but there's several different pieces coming up with unemployment. So that was a huge lead in, which you could probably give, Susan, but I'm going to pass it to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. As I said, I'm a staff attorney at Vermont Legal Aid, and part of our work is representing workers in unemployment compensation matters. I'll start by talking about the unemployment insurance bills, H781 and H636, and then yes, I'd be more than happy if time permits to share our perspective on the Labor Department's reports on urgent, compelling, and necessitous, and also the Domestic and Sexual Violence Survivors Benefits Program. Both H781 and H686 create a mechanism for the Labor Department to forgive or cancel repayment of some unemployment benefits that were paid out by mistake. Both bills are currently in House Commerce and Economic Development and haven't had hearings yet. There are some differences between the two bills, which I'll get to in a minute, but I just wanted to cover real quickly what I'm talking about when I say an overpayment. An overpayment is what it sounds like. It happens when a person gets paid benefits and then it's later discovered that they really weren't eligible for the benefits, or that they maybe got more than they were supposed to get. And there's a few ways that overpayments can happen. One category of overpayments are fraud overpayments, and that's not what either of these bills is addressing in terms of the waiver. The fraud overpayments can't be waived. So I just want to be clear that we're talking about non-fraud overpayments. Non-fraud overpayments can happen in a couple of different ways. Either perhaps the employer didn't properly or timely respond when the Labor Department requested more information about the separation so they could decide whether to approve the claim. Sometimes the agency makes an error. No agency or agency employee is perfect, and mistakes happen. And sometimes the unemployed person makes an honest mistake filing their claim. We see claimants who don't understand the questions on the claimant portal, or who might struggle to use DOL's technology. And the unemployment eligibility rules are really complicated, and it's not an easy process to navigate for anyone, but particularly if you're a worker with a disability, with limited literacy, or if you don't have good internet access, or if you're not very good with computers, or if your primary language is not English. That's when mistakes can happen. And the problem is that when the overpayments get detected, and then the worker gets a overpayment notice months or sometimes years later, at that point they've already spent all the money that people spend their unemployment benefits on things like housing and groceries and other basic needs. There are a couple of different ways that the Labor Department can get the money back. They send bills every month, but their main ways of recovering it are through taking people's income tax refunds to satisfy the overpayment debt, or taking 100% of the person's benefits the next time they are unemployed and qualify for unemployment benefits. But right now, the Labor Department doesn't have any way in Vermont state law to affirmatively forgive those overpayments. The waiver mechanism that's proposed in the two bills is actually quite common. All of the other New England states have a waiver provision in their unemployment laws. The majority of states in the US have waiver provisions. There's only 11 states that don't. It's also consistent with the federal guidance. The US Department of Labor strongly encourages states to adopt policies that permit waiver of non-fault overpayments when the recovery of the overpayment would be, and this is the legal standard, contrary to equity and good conscience. Also, if you remember during the pandemic, there were the federal benefits that were paid out either as a supplement to benefits, or it got paid to people who wouldn't qualify for traditional unemployment benefits. And the Congress authorized states to forgive overpayments of the federal pandemic benefits, and the Vermont Department of Labor has implemented that. Has chosen to exercise that authority, and they've implemented the federal guidance to waive federal overpayments. The problem is there's no parallel mechanism in state law to waive an overpayment of state UI benefits. While we differ on some of the details, the Labor Department does agree that it would be appropriate for there to be, I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but just to share our discussions to date, that they do support generally the idea of a waiver provision. And where what 781 and 636 have in common is they would both change the law to require the Labor Department to waive overpayments if the overpayment was without fault, if it was not the person's fault, and if it would be against equity and good conscience to require them to repay it. 781 offers some additional important protections for claimants that we think are very important. It makes it clear that a waiver can be requested anytime after the person's been found overpaid, because people's circumstances can change over time. It describes the situations that could be considered without fault or against equity and good conscience. And then for people who can't qualify for a waiver, who don't meet that standard, it would limit the amount that the Labor Department can withhold from someone's benefits to repay a past overpayment. And it would pause any collection activities while the application for the waiver and any appeal is pending. And it would also codify the department's current practice of offering a reasonable repayment plan to satisfy an overpayment. And I will stop there because I'm already way over time, but I'm happy to answer any questions. So I due to some conversations, we do have some insight into where the Labor Department has a different point of view, and we've had some discussions about that, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that afterwards.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Susan. Thank you. And I'll just say on these bills, we will be taking unemployment in general up before crossover. And so, I mean, I serve on that committee, so I'll be keeping a tight eye, or a close eye, tight eye. What tight eye is, a close eye on these issues. And I'm just going to briefly also just say, since I can take the space to do this, just to add on so folks know about the report that Susan was mentioning. This was out of a bill last session, of course, to look at two different things: the expansion of eligibility I'm shorthanding it here, for the urgent and compelling reasons, but also looking at the state's current program, which is funded with general fund dollars for victims of or survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence. That program, we had them go back and look. It's been on the books for about 10 years. I want to make you all guess, this is not call and response. Only 13 people have used that program in the 10 years. And we know, of course, that the rates of actual domestic violence and sexual violence is way higher than that in terms of what this very important and powerful program could mean for folks who are trying to escape abuse, et cetera. Only 13, and the cost of what their claims was something like under $50,000 over those 10 years, when we put money like $25,000 to $30,000 a year aside for that program alone. So because frankly, one could not come back with that report, of course, the Department of Labor said we should absolutely roll this into the regular UI program system so it's easier for people to use. Right now, people have to be denied and then know that they could access this other program. So I think this is a move in the right direction, but it took them, forcing them to do a report to show how abysmal the use of this program has been for 10 years. And I frankly want to apologize to Vermonters for such a poorly administered program where it was not being pushed out, so folks could really know this benefit could be utilized. The other side of it is going to be a bit more of a fight, but we're going to have more hearings hopefully on the side of expanding eligibility for unemployment with urgent and compelling. The Department of Labor did a report on this, and they have surveyed about 600 or so employers. And literally the surveys came back and said there's about 6% they estimated of their own employees, these employers, who had to quit their jobs because they lost childcare, and about 4% because they needed to care for an elderly person in their family. So it literally proves the need for such a thing in Vermont. And yet the Department of Labor is opposed to expanding this because they couldn't find enough data. And so obviously I pushed hard on that because they had it right in front of them, and the Joint Fiscal Office has a different analysis on the cost. So I want to flag that because hopefully that gets rolled up in this larger unemployment discussion as Susan was talking about these overpayment issues as well. Just taking the stand for that one because it's really important to me. David, yeah.
Just wanted to add one thought for Susan and this crew on the unemployment insurance bill. We've been talking about something that was proposed and actually passed in California, was ultimately vetoed, the right to get unemployment when out on strike. And so we're interested in looking at that for this bill. And also, I should say, my understanding is that the department has essentially said, if they haven't said it publicly, we've heard that that this is the last vehicle for UI changes for a while from a policy perspective because they're doing their technology upgrade, so they're not really capable of doing much more after this year. So if there are ideas that we've wanted for a long time, we should at least put them on the table. Like I think we should come back to the idea of dependent benefits and things like that. So just putting that out there.
Well, one thing that will be music to your ears, David and Suzanne, I don't know if you saw this as well, is I specifically asked Cameron Wood, who is the director of unemployment, about, because they said we want to roll in the domestic violence program into the regular UI system. I said point blank, can you do that? Because you've said before you cannot do this because the mainframe can't handle any policy changes. And he clearly stated back, yes, we can do that. It's literally the administrative side of it. It doesn't have anything to do with the mainframe. So to me, it's very important evidence to show when we can make policy changes, and it is separate from the limitations of this mainframe system, which is on like a 3 to 4 year track for being updated. So that was an important moment. We only have a couple more moments with folks here. Are there other questions or comments folks wanted to share from the caucus? Representative Hedrick?
I'll leave it more as kind of an appreciation and something that I found really helpful. I was going to ask all of you anticipated pushback, and as we start preparing for how we're going to strategize pushing back against the pushback. So David, thank you for bringing in what you did for S102. That's really helpful for me to get a kind of that finger on the pulse of where that cynicism is showing up, in this case from the chamber. So as you're starting to hear that, that's just, for me, that kind of gets the gears working in a really good way. So I don't think we need to go through everybody right now, but as you're watching these bills kind of continue to develop and you're hearing pushback in the committee rooms that we're not hearing, that heads up is always incredibly helpful.
David?
I forgot to mention one other thing, a major piece of legislation, which is actually a constitutional amendment, will be starting in the Senate February 13th and 14th. We have 20 sponsors, tripartisan sponsorship in the Senate for now. And we're hoping, we hope that makes its way over the House where we need 76 votes, and we should be able to get that. We'll see. But I just wanted to put that on folks' radars too. What you were saying, Troy, around like what the response will be. I think we'll be hearing a lot from Right to Work. But great point, and we can relay information about that and all this stuff. So thanks.
You want to just, maybe I blinked and didn't hear you say it, the constitutional amendment is about?
The constitutional amendment puts into our Constitution the right to organize and the right to be free from right to work laws. We see this as a value. I mean, our current laws reflect that, but this, our laws on reproductive freedom, our laws against slavery and indentured servitude, this is sort of the real statement about what we think, working folks should have a bare minimum right to in the state. So.
Great. Any final words from our guests to either emphasize or add in our final minute or two that we have? Looking around. Okay.
No, I mean, I would just
yes.
say that I think it's important to maintain in the opposition around the captive audience is it does nothing to take away workers' right to decide for themselves. And what it does is just allow them to make decisions free and clear of intimidation. And so I think in all of that, the focus is that this is about giving individuals the right to make that without worrying that they're going to lose their job from the feared tactics. And I think that the chamber probably gave a perfect example of that. We're just trying to educate everyone because that shadow that gets cast is ironically the exact same shadows that pop up in a captive audience meeting.
That testimony was Friday, so.
It was Thursday.
Okay. All right, y'all, we need to hustle back to the State House. I want to thank Susan and Kristen and Liz and David for being here as always, and keep us posted. We can always do short updates as our session keeps going in this caucus. So thank you very much, and we can go offline.